people that followed him, and there were millions, considered him not just an insightful, funny, professional broadcaster, but part of their family and the best friend they've ever met. And I hear that repeatedly. I wish people could see some of my stuff, had access to some of the replies. Well, they actually would if they went under my column and would see the replies when I tweet about him. It's uncanny, and how so many people felt like this. And that's why when he died, I think they felt a sense of personal loss, profound loss. And it's heartwarming to me. It's sad, but heartwarming, and it's amazing.
Back at it, my friends, firmly ensconced here at the EIB Southern Command. Behind this, the golden EIB microphone, Rush Limbaugh here at 800-282-2882. If you want to appear on the program, the email address, if you'd rather send an email, lrushbaugh@eibnet.us.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's on one hand, hard for me to listen to that, and on another hand, exhilarating for me to listen to that, because Rush Limbaugh was a part of my life every day for almost 30 years. And even longer. Well, it was about 30 years. And the only reason you're listening to my voice right now is because of Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh started talk radio as we know it, which turned into podcasting. And he was a brilliant man who was not only brilliant, but he had such an amazing sense of humor that made his political analysis all that more insightful and fun. And I would never play that music unless I had a Limbaugh on the program. And I do. My friend David Limbaugh, Rush's brother, who's been on this program so many times before, he was catapulted to fame because he wrote the foreword to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. In fact, for those of you that don't know, David and I met because David became a believer largely through apologetics. I mean, he can explain some of that as we get into our program today. And he was very much appreciated Dr. Geisler. And so we met in 2003, just as Dr. Geisler and I were writing I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and we asked him to do the foreword, and he did. So here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the great David Limbaugh. David, it's been 4 years since that music graced the airways with Rush coming in right after it. I know you miss him. I mean, literally, I miss that guy every day. At 12:06, when I see 12:06 on my clock, I think Rush Limbaugh. And I know for you it was 11:06 because you're Central Time Zone. How did all this begin with Rush? We're going to reminisce for a while, ladies and gentlemen, on this program, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Jesus in the Old Testament. But tell us about how did your brother pioneer talk radio and become a refuge to millions of people every day?
Which, by the way, is true, that he did become a refuge. I've learned that increasingly after he died because of the feedback I get mainly on X, formerly Twitter. I can tweet something about Rush and I'll get, a scary number of responses. And you might think I'm doing it just to get those. No, I do it when I'm moved to do it. Something makes me want to mention him or some aspect about him. And I almost feel guilty doing it because it's like clickbait, because I'll get thousands of responses and retweets. And it's pretty amazing. But the central theme of this is that people that followed him, and there were millions, considered him not just an insightful, funny, professional broadcaster, but part of their family and the best friend they'd never met. And I hear that repeatedly. I wish people could see some of my stuff, had access to some of the replies. Well, they actually would if they went under my column and would see the replies when I tweet about him. It's uncanny, and how so many people felt like this. And that's why when he died, I think they felt a sense of personal loss, profound loss. And it's heartwarming to me. It's sad, but heartwarming. And it's amazing. I always knew how great he was and all this stuff and how good he was, but and how much he was liked and loved. I had no idea the magnitude until after he died, because it was difference in kind rather than degree. It was explosive. I cannot overstate the amount of affection his audience had for him. And so when people say, "Oh, don't you hate it when people slam him?" No, because the people that slam him do so on the basis of ideology and leftist hate. And the people that knew him and the people that are on my side of the political aisle uniformly appreciated him. So the left is going to hate the people on the right. Most people on the left actually do, and they reserve their main hatred for those who are effective communicators and effective practitioners of the conservative ideology. And so that's why they hate Rush more than they hate anyone other than Trump and now Elon Musk. So it's a compliment to me. Not that I relish their hatred, but it doesn't surprise me and it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a badge of honor because he was so effective in what he did every day. Rush would see things that nobody else would see. Typically, it was like an hypocrisy that somebody would say something and then he would immediately be able to point out, "You're doing the same thing you're complaining about." And so he was very insightful that way. And the thing I appreciated, other than the incredible insights he had into politics, was his humor.
Yeah, because
he would make it so fun to listen to. I mean, I remember, David, that one time I got to meet Rush was when I came to see you, and he was in town. This was September of 2008. And we all had dinner, as you remember. We were at the club there, and Catherine was there. They were just dating at that point. And he was so gracious. He took me on his plane and showed me around. And I remember I was about to debate Christopher Hitchens just 2 days later. That was like the first debate I was going to have with on a question of God. I'm married, so I've had other debates. But I remember this was the time when Joe Biden was running for president. I think he was going up against Barack Obama for the primary. And I don't know if you remember this, David, but Biden was at some meeting in South Carolina, and he was recognizing people in the crowd. And there was a guy by the name of Chuck who was actually in a wheelchair. Do you remember this? Yes. And Biden kept asking him to stand up, Chuck, stand up. And Rush was he was pointing this out. And my father and I, who came with me to the debate, when we were leaving the Hitchens debate, I almost had to pull over the car. I was laughing so hard the way Rush was describing it.
Well, because the guy was in a wheelchair and couldn't stand up.
And Biden kept saying, "Stand up, Chuck, stand up." But Rush just had a way of presenting things that he was making a political comment at the same time he was getting you to laugh. He was kind of like the Babylon Bee on radio.
Yeah. And, well, the thing is, to respond to a few of those points you made, his being insightful. He used to jokingly say he could read the stitches on a fastball, meaning, that the fastball comes in to a baseball batter, and it comes so fast you can barely react, much less see it. But his point was, he sees things in slow motion. He has that kind of clarity. Now, a lot of times, Rush would brag and not mean it. I mean, he knew he was good at what he did, but when he was bragging, it was mainly just for hyperbolic effect and to be funny. So people misunderstood his bragging as being arrogant, and it wasn't. But in that case, it was accurate. He was so insightful and so uniquely insightful, and he had insights that other political commentaries did not. He could read one article about something and pick up a nugget from it or project a nugget from it that other people, including George Will, some of these most brilliant people, could not see. And that's what I think made him, that's one of the many things that made him unique. So he was never cookie cutter. He was never bullet point. And he never wrote notes in advance of his show. He just would have these insights on the fly, and he would go into it.
Yeah, he was brilliant, and we're going to talk more about Rush right after the break, and also talk about Christianity in Rush. Where was Rush when it came to Jesus? So you're not going to want to miss that. We're talking to David Limbaugh, who, by the way, David's an attorney and an author. We'll talk more about that later in the program. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We're back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek. We're talking to my friend David Limbaugh. He's an attorney. He has written several books on Christianity, and he is the brother of the great Rush Limbaugh. Just as talented as Rush is, he's just talented in different ways. He's a great author. He's got some great books. We're going to talk about one of them a little bit later in the program. But we were just talking about Rush's amazing sense of humor and his incisiveness and insightfulness when it came to politics. And I know you wanted to continue the conversation. We got interrupted by a hard break, David. Pick it up.
Yeah, when you so rudely interrupted me going into the last break, I heard that music and I got to shut up. I'm allergic to that kind of break music. But I just want to mention a few other things because you touched on them. In addition to his insightfulness, what I think people realize is he had an amazing memory, so that when he was analyzing an issue on the fly, he could recall things that had happened in the Reagan administration, the Carter administration. And I'm saying I can remember the general stuff, but he remembered specifics, and he could go into detail and point to how those things were analogous to the present time. And he provided that perspective of having a historical perspective and right on the money. That was one thing. Number two, Rush's insightfulness and brilliance mostly came from my father, who was a lawyer for years, constitutional scholar, patriot, conservative, supported Goldwater when it wasn't cool back in 64. And my dad used to sit around at his table, dining room table, and we kids from high school, most kids would be out chasing girls, and we would later, but we'd always convene at my house, and our friends did, and Rush's friends, to listen to my dad pontificate. So it's like my dad held court, and it was a mini foreshadowing of what Rush would do later. Now, my dad could not have pulled that off because he didn't have the disposition and demeanor and sense of humor that my brother did. He had all the other things and all the other good things. But my dad, my brother, and I get the sense of humor from my mom, who was a cut up, and just, it was a great combination of genes. And so I love that both parents contributed to his genius. And the other thing I want to say, we may or may not get into it, he, from the beginning, when we were very young, he was an impressionist. He could imitate people, do it, different voices, all kinds of voices. And he later, of course, used that skill in his broadcasting. Just wanted to throw those few things out there.
Now, it wasn't just your dad. Wasn't your grandfather also named Rush? And wasn't he an attorney that worked till into his 90s or 100 or something like that?
And my grandfather, Rush Limbaugh Sr., was brilliant, practicing lawyer, well-respected throughout the state. And he worked till he was 103, practiced law till he was 103, died at 104. My Uncle Steve was a lawyer still, a federal judge, still is a lawyer back at our firm at age 97. And my dad was a lawyer until he passed away. And so my cousin, Steve Jr. is a lawyer. His son, Chris, is a lawyer. So we come by it honestly. And I went that route and Rush didn't, and was smarter than all of us put together because he made 20 times more money than any of us put together, or all of us put together. Considering that money is the most important thing in life, as we should emphasize on this Christian podcast.
Now, growing up, what did you recognize in Rush? Or maybe you didn't recognize it, but looking back, you said he followed his talents to the T. What did he demonstrate as a kid that and allowed him to be what he became?
He, as I said, he always did voices, and he always had an affinity for broadcasting, radio. So we listened to baseball games where Harry Carey was announcing St. Louis Cardinals baseball. We lived in Cape Girardeau, 100 miles south of St. Louis. So we got the Cardinal baseball on the radio locally. And Harry Carey was a, famous broadcaster there, loved by everybody. Rush he would turn down the radio and he'd do his own broadcasting. And that mainly he did that on TV because you obviously couldn't intuit what was going on radio without listening to it. But he emulated Harry Carey sometimes. But Dizzy Dean, for example, would be on TV and he would turn the volume down and he would call the game. And he really was talented. It wasn't just one of these kids you had to indulge. His friends, junior high and high school, marveled at how he could do it. And he wasn't trying to show off. He just loved it. And when we were kids, he had this toy called the Remco Caravel. I've mentioned this before. It was a little blue device that allowed you to broadcast on the AM airwaves in the confines of your home. So we could listen to him as if he was really broadcasting on the radio. So he always did that. And he developed that into high school where we would have little skits that he would do and fictitious things, monologues, and all kinds of things. And people were riveted. So he really actually came out socially as a result of his broadcasting skills. And he willed his way into this. As he said, he got fired 7 times because he always knew what he wanted to do. So he was a DJ. He was supposed to be spinning records and say minimal stuff, but he couldn't help himself. He'd make political commentary, do sight gags, do all kinds of things. And so he'd get fired because he was disobedient in that sense, as he bragged later. Not that disobedience is good, but that he just always did what he wanted to do because it was an outworking of who he knew he would be. And finally, after getting fired 7 times and having a lot of non-broadcasting jobs, he found a program director in Sacramento that would allow him to be himself. And the rest is history.
It's really providential. I was actually in Sacramento when he got his start because I was there for about, well, not very long. I was there for about 6 months in training for the Navy. And I didn't know about him when I was there, but he and I were there about the same time. And then, of course, in 1988, he got the big break to go to New York City, WABC in New York, right, where your friend Sean Hannity is still on the radio there.
Right. Well, not quite. He moved to Florida.
Oh, yeah, but I'm sure he's still broadcasting. He broadcast on the big WABC. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Rush moved to Florida, too, because of the crazy taxation and everything that goes on in New York City. Yeah. Let me get out of here.
Yeah.
And I discovered Rush during the Clarence Thomas hearings. I happened to turn on the AM radio, got the kids in the car. I'm like, who is this guy? Man, he's really good. And he was talking about, well, not to go into too much details, but Anita Hill was basically claiming that Clarence Thomas had somehow sexually harassed her or something. And I remember Rush saying, guys, you might as well just take the door off the hinges because from now on, it's just going to be her word against yours and she's going to win, Yeah. Anyway, from then on, I was hooked. Yeah. And what was amazing about Rush was that even in the darkest times politically for Christians and conservatives, when Clinton took over or Obama took over, he literally was a refuge every single day for political sanity and humor through some very dark political times.
Yeah, and he had this contagious spirit of optimism. So people would go to him, you say refuge, because they were feeling down. There's a lot of negativity, by the way, and there is now, too. A lot of naysayers. Trump has done amazing things in the first 100 days, and we have people on the right. He hasn't done it fast enough. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're mad at Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino because they haven't arrested the entire political left. I mean, I understand the impatience, but let's be real. It takes a while to do these things properly. And so Rush would be a great antidote for these people who just can't help themselves and who don't have proper patience and a sense of realism. Okay, we got this. We're not making excuses if for people who are not willing to act and just faking it. These people in the Trump administration are not faking it. For the most part, these people are really dedicated to the cause and they're doing it. Rush would have provided that counter balance to the theme that goes on among a lot of right wingers, which is pure negativity from some of them.
Let's talk a little bit, David, if we could, about Rush and Jesus. What did both you and he believe in growing up? I know you went to a Methodist church in Cape Girardeau.
Yeah.
What was your spiritual life like and beliefs as growing up, and then once he got into radio, and then how'd you become a Christian?
We were raised as Christians, and as you say, in the Methodist church, and went through confirmation, and when they gave us our Bibles, we had to learn all the lessons, and our parents were Christian, and they, taught us all the Christian values. I don't think that we were as into spirituality at our home as some people were, and it's hard to explain that, and I don't think that in some ways. Sometimes I think the church was Bible centered, and sometimes I don't. If I'm broadcasting here on a podcast, and somebody would say, "Well, you're saying the church wasn't." I'm not saying that. What I'm really saying is, I don't think I was attuned to it. I was not receptive to the message, even though I went through all those studies and all Bible school, all of it. But I really found myself searching and seeking, because I always believed in God, but I didn't embrace Christ's deity, and I didn't know anything about the Bible, even though I had been exposed to it and read it in Sunday school and all that, and went to Sunday school classes, but it didn't register with me. Maybe because I'm ADHD, undiagnosed, I don't know. But I do know that starting in college, I really was searching and started reading apologetics books, Josh McDowell, Norman Geisler, your protege, Paul Little, Know What and Why You Believe, C.S. Lewis, all those different ones. And I knew that, I really kind of knew, even intellectually, that Christ was God, the second person of the Trinity. But I didn't know why I couldn't accept certain things, wrestled with the problem of evil and suffering that we all, so many people have. But I knew what the right team was and what the truth was, but I couldn't intellectually say that I really firmly embraced it, because I wasn't knowledgeable enough. I hadn't studied, and I hadn't opened myself up to Christ and asked him in. And so I began to study, and I realized that so many intellectual doubts I thought were intellectual were answered by brilliant people, and these people who claim that. Well, I'll get back into it. We're going into a break, but anyway, I became a believer and then accepted Christ, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we'll pick it up right after the break. We'll also talk about how he got into apologetics, and then how he wrote a number of books in support of apologetics and theology, and then where was Rush with Jesus. Don't go anywhere. We're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. My guest, David Limbaugh. Don't go anywhere. Back in 2 minutes. If you want to learn how to better present apologetics, evidence for the faith, you need to come to the Cross-Examine Instructor Academy, CIA. This summer, it's in Charlotte, North Carolina, July 31st to August 2nd. I'll be there along with Greg Kokel, Natasha Crane, Elisa Childers, Alan Parr, Jorge Gill, Richard Howe, several other instructors to help you get better at presenting the evidence and answering questions. If you want to be a part of it, you need to apply. You need to apply soon. We're running out of time here. We're running out of seats. Go to crossexamine.org, click on events, you'll see CIA. Check it out. This is the 18th year we're doing it. We've had people come back 5 or 6, 7 times because they love the program so much. They learn something every time they come. And if you're not a presenter, but you just want to learn more, you can come as a non-presenter. Again, go to crossexamine.org, click on events. You'll see CIA there. My guest today, David Limbaugh, is a longtime member of our board, the Cross-Examined .org board, and so we appreciate all the work he's done there. And also, he wrote the foreword for "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." David, we were talking about you eventually got a hold of some apologetics, became a Christian. Obviously, you, with an attorney's mind, were able to discern the truth. You've written books, Jesus on Trial, several others. Hopefully, we'll talk about one of them here shortly. Where was Rush on all this in terms of Christianity, in your view? Well,
he, in later years, he didn't talk much about it on the radio, and it's not because there was nothing negative about it. It's just that he recognized that he had never studied it enough, and if he'd gotten into it, he wouldn't really be equipped. Plus, he viewed his show as primarily political. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlap and intersection between faith, culture, and politics. And he didn't shy away from any issues. He was adamantly pro-life, etc. So I don't know. You look back, it's a difficult subject for me, because when I used to ask him, because I was concerned because he didn't talk about it, are you a believer? He claimed that he was always a believer. He never had doubts like I did. And I don't know. I don't know what went through his mind. All I do know at the time is that as I would witness to him, as I got more and more into it, he was always receptive. He always wanted to learn more. He was even eager to be part of a little Bible study I did with my daughter, Kristen, on the book of Acts as I was studying through, and we did it through email. And I asked Rush if he wanted to be copied on it, and he did. And he actually asked me, is another one coming? He was eager to learn. And so what I tell people is, I don't know if he had accepted Christ as his Savior. I don't know if he really fully understood the difference between intellectual belief and assent and actually putting your trust, your saving faith in Christ. I don't know. I would be presumptuous to venture a guess, but I do know that as he went through before he got his fatal diagnosis, cancer diagnosis, he was getting closer to Christ. He used to describe how he talked to God every day, and he knew God was the triune God. We're talking about the God of the Bible, not some ephemeral New Age thing. And he would talk to him every day, 24 hours, like we're supposed to. But as he got sick, that became ever more intense, and he became a firm believer. Whether he was in the sense that we talked about before, I don't know, but it really doesn't matter, because you can embrace Christ at the last minute, as we know from the thief on the cross. And if it's sincere, if you're repentant, and you actually put your faith in it, saving faith in him, you will be saved. You will be redeemed. And so I have no doubt that he was. So I don't like to presumptuously say he wasn't actually a believer before the last few years of his life. He didn't get into it that much with me. And what I've described is accurate. Very receptive, very embracing of the idea, and said that he never had any intellectual doubts about it, not any appreciable ones, which I envy almost, but he didn't.
I know he was a big proponent whenever you wrote a book, and you've written several books on apologetics, on theology. I know years ago you wrote a book called Persecution, related to Christians in the public square. But then you also wrote several books on politics. What about 2014, 2015? I think you wrote Jesus on Trial. That was your first one.
Right.
Why did you decide to do that? And I mean, then you got on a roll, David. I mean, you wrote like 5 or 6 books in like 7 years.
Yeah.
All on Christianity. How did you go about doing that?
Okay. I'd written 7 books or 6, all political books, including Persecution, which is about discrimination and persecution of Christians in the United States. Not severe persecution, but the many ways we were discriminated against. But they were all political. But after I became a believer, I was on fire for God, on fire for theology, on fire for apologetics, learning the Bible. And I love to write. I love to study. And I took a correspondence course in the Old Testament from the Moody Bible Institute. I don't know if I ever told you that. And it was so amazingly impactful for me, because it showed how Christ was the centerpiece of the Old Testament. And that just intrigued me so much. I finally, and I began to study, and I had a mentor neighbor named Steve Johnson, who had a PhD from either Westminster, I think his undergraduate was Dallas Theological Seminary. And anyway, he taught me and he mentored me through these things. And I was lucky to have him and other people who directed, and you later came into that role for me, to point me to the right things, not crazy, not far out theories, not prosperity gospel stuff, but mainstream evangelical Christianity, Bible-centered, Jesus-centered Christianity. So I just inhaled that stuff, and I just wanted to share it because there's so many people I know that have doubts, even Christians, that I wanted to write a book from a lay perspective that was thoroughly researched and hopefully explained in lay terms why I came to believe what I believe and how it's so important to read the Bible and explain all these things, because I was so excited that I wanted to share what I learned, realizing the admonition that teachers are held to a higher standard. So it's somebody like me who doesn't have a degree. I got to be very careful and humble when I delve into this subject and try to, have it thoroughly backed up with research. And hopefully I have discernment that enables me to ferret through what is and is not worthy. But so I just, bottom line, I just wanted to share what I learned. And I was so enthusiastic that I'd study. I had Logos Bible software. I had thousands of books on it. I could research things at the drop of a hat and incorporate what I'd learned, heavily footnoted, into the books. And when I get into a book, I'm just so focused that I do it for 10 hours, 12 hours a day for 4 months, whatever. And I had great editors, and that's what. So you asked me how I could do it, because I became on fire. And I was also lucky. I could almost say this was providential, but I don't want to be presumptuous. I have a pretty robust law practice. And during the times I was writing books, every time, it's almost like God granted me a dispensation that I didn't have much high-pressure demanding legal work while I was writing those books. I'll never understand it. It's like as soon as the book was submitted, I was inundated again. And I'm not just saying, I can't say that God did that because I'm some gift to the Christian readership world, but it sure happened that way, whether it was providential or not.
Well, the books are so well researched and well written, and I've had the privilege of reading them before they came out. You usually sent me a copy, and I didn't suggest much, but
not true. I'm not just saying this. I would not have had the security, the confidence, if you hadn't read the transcript and offered many suggestions throughout all the books, and especially the first one. Well, not especially, all the books. And that gave me the confidence that I'd had somebody I trust kind of screen what I was saying. Make sure, no, you're out too far here. That's not really. And so it was a learning process for me, and you were amazing on that. So don't undersell your role.
Well, in the next segment, I want to talk about one of the books that I'm finding. I went back and started to read this one again because I'm doing a course on our TV show called The Bible You Never Knew. And the Emmaus Code was the original name of this book, David, that you wrote. It's now called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. I want to talk about that in the next segment because I think it really helps people understand the divine thread running through the series of books we put under one binding we call the Bible, written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors, yet Jesus is woven through the entire thing, even the Old Testament, and that's what that book does. So I want to talk about that, but I want to go back to Rush for a second, if we can, because one of the things that amazed me about him, when he got the diagnosis, I think 14 months before he died, I remember when you called me on that. I want to say it was January of 2020.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And then he died in February of 13 months, 2021.
Correct.
Here's the thing that amazed me about him through this whole thing is that it seemed to me he thought he was doing God's will throughout his life, and he didn't experience any crisis of faith or crisis as his death came. He knew he was going to die probably within a year. He just kept doing after his diagnosis the same thing he was doing before his diagnosis. You know, he had the same passion, the same spirit, the same humor, the same insightful analysis. It seemed like he knew what he was doing and he knew where he was going, and he was just going to do it as long as he could.
That's correct. And I think he felt like he had a duty to his radio family to plow through as much as he could, because he knew intuitively that they were counting on him. And so he loved nothing more than going to work every day and doing what he was doing. And you're right, I think he did feel a spiritual awareness of the Holy Spirit and Christ and the Father urging him to continue and doing what he could for the kingdom. And again, it was in political form, but nevertheless, he persevered. And you're right, he had an unwavering spirit through that entire time. You would not have been able to tell, other than when he got very sentimental, that he was aware that he was dying. And he did get sentimental, and it was moving those times that he did. But you're right, he was unflappable, he was excited, he was fun, and he was enthusiastic and energetic through that whole period.
Oh, he did. I've heard him talk about Jesus and the resurrection two or three times.
Yeah.
And I know he spoke about it in one of the last programs he did.
Yeah.
That he knew where he was going.
Right. No
and
question.
he had accepted Jesus. And anyway, we're talking to my friend David Limbaugh, and we're going to talk a little bit about Jesus in the Old Testament, a very insightful book he wrote called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. You don't want to miss our last segment, and you want to get this book, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, back in 2. Welcome back to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I just thought of something as I went through the break. When Christopher Hitchens died, I wrote a column called Christopher Hitchens, Evidence of a Divine Being. Obviously, I didn't agree with Christopher on the God issue or Christianity, but I found him such a persuasive and interesting personality that his personality can't be just the result of molecules in motion. He was evidence of a divine being, and I think the same thing is true of Rush Limbaugh. Yeah. And I mean, you look at the kind of personality Rush had. I mean, he was just, he was a complete package when it came to intellect and humor together and insightfulness. And I'm talking about two very popular personalities, but your personality, you, the listener, the viewer right now, is also, you're made in the image of God. You are, there's nobody in history who's been exactly like you, and nobody who will be exactly like you. You are a unique creation of God. It's evidence for a divine being. And in our last segment here, I want to go back to my friend David Limbaugh. David, the book, Emmaus Code, originally it was called, now it's called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament, is a very interesting and eye-opening read. And it was originally called the Emmaus Code because in Luke 24, on the road to Emmaus, Jesus tells those disciples who don't know they don't really know who he is. He says, the entire Old Testament is about me. Really? Is it? You unpack it in the Emmaus Code or Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. How is the whole Old Testament about Jesus?
You know, yes, and I want to make a point here. Mm-hmm. The thrust of this book is to point out that the entire Old Testament is Christ-centered. But one of my pet peeves is that people try to distinguish between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. And if they do that, they don't understand the Christian God, because God is unchanging and God is triune. It's not like the Father was dominant in the Old Testament and he was a mean old man, and that Christ became all salt and light in the New Testament. That is so vacuous. It annoys me, because Christ was at the creation. Christ created. Christ was an operative agent in the very creation. And he created the universe, and he sustains it continuously sustains it. And they were all, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit were in harmony with everything they have done. Christ's decision to sacrifice himself, the Father's and Son's and Holy Spirit's decision. It was a joint decision that he would sacrifice himself. People, they said, Christ gave everything of himself. He died for us so we could live. And that's true, because there is no efficient sacrifice without the shedding of blood. And Christ did it. But people forget that the Father suffered just as much as Jesus, because he loved him more than we can ever imagine any love. And he had to endure what Christ was enduring, because he loved him so much and saw what he did, what he gave, living in eternity past with the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, with the Father and Holy Spirit. Before the creation of the world, they knew that they were going to create mankind, and they knew mankind would sin, and that there is no correction for sin unless there's a shedding of blood. And the only way it could happen is if Christ became incarnate and suffered the very kinds of things, the indignities that human beings do. Imagine a God, the God, becoming a human being. It's more profound than you or I becoming a fly. But except that the fly wouldn't have self-awareness that he's God, that he was a human. So Christ came down and suffered for us, and excruciating, incredible physical pain. But the biggest pain, in my view, was his separation from the Father, with whom he shared bliss in eternity past. And he had to do that for us and be separated from the Father, to the point of even asking God, the Father, to take this cup from him. Don't make me go through this suffering unless you just have to, but it's thy will, not my will. And that used to be a cause for doubt for me. Why would Christ not take himself off the cross? Well, I didn't understand the entire salvation scheme. He had to die. He had to come down for us. But what that shows is not that the fact that he asked the Father to take him off the cross in a way was what does not show that he was human and not God. It shows he was 100% human and 100% God. He had to feel that way. He had to physically feel what we feel in order for it to be real. This isn't some imaginary, theoretical sacrifice that we can just satisfy some divine equation. He actually had to do it. He did do it. He suffered so much that he wanted to get out of it in human terms, but knew that he couldn't and shouldn't and wouldn't in divine terms. I just can't get over. But so people need to understand the Old Testament points to Christ. We didn't repeal the Old Testament when the New Testament came out. Paul, Jesus, they all talk about the scriptures. They decide the scriptures were the Old Testament. They later incorporated the New Testament because they were written through inspiration of the Holy Spirit after Christ died and after Pentecost and all that. But the Old Testament remains in the book. The Old Covenant was replaced by the New Covenant, but the Old Testament remains.
Key distinction. If you don't distinction. Yeah.
If you don't understand the Old Testament, if you don't understand that it all points to Christ and how, you will not have the profound understanding of the gospel that you need to understand. And I try to explain that in the book. There's types of Christ. There's messianic prophecies. The final linchpin that really got me turning the corner on intellectual belief and ultimately saving faith was the messianic prophecies, which I did hundreds of them, and they're in every book, and they're so amazing. Look at Isaiah 53 and Psalms 22. Read those together and tell me they don't point to the very crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And we could detail. There's so many, but I want people to understand. Don't think you can ignore the New Testament, the Old Testament, because if you do, you'll never understand the New Testament or the gospel to the extent that you need to. It's richer, it's fuller. And that was my primary purpose of this book, was to share that insight with people.
It is a great read that I think people should avail themselves of. Even now, the book was written almost 10 years ago, I think, but it's timeless. It's an evergreen book. David here is talking about how Jesus is throughout the Old Testament, just like Jesus himself said. He says this in Luke 24. He also says it in John 5 and maybe a couple other places, that he is the center of the Bible and the center of the Old Testament. That's who the Old Testament writers were writing about. They were writing about him. And, David, you point out that many times believers struggle with reading the Old Testament. What do you think is the most important advice you could give to those who feel overwhelmed reading it? Like, how do you make sense of it?
Yeah, what I would recommend that people do is try to familiarize yourself with the Old Testament, what it's really getting. Read an Old Testament introduction book, or take some classes in the Old Testament. Study Messianic prophecies. Study Old Testament prophecies. Look at the prophecy in Daniel, I think it's 9:25, which pinpointed to the day that Christ would be crucified. I mean, you can accept that or not. It's pretty compelling. And as I said, the prophecies in Psalms and all that. I would try to encourage people not to be intimidated. Yeah, there's some boring stuff. There's the genealogies and all that. But the point is, the genealogies are proof that Christ descended from the line of David and the root of Jesse and all that. It's important that we understand. It's kind of like God superintended the Old Testament and the way it was written, both to show his redemptive plan and to show how all these things culminated in Christ. And the covenants, there's 8 biblical covenants between God and man. There's all these messianic prophecies. There is an original. People don't realize in Genesis 3:15, after mankind had sinned and fallen, Christ and God gave human beings a path to redemption, and he told the serpent that he was going to bruise the heel of mankind, and he was going to that mankind would overcome, so that
would crush the head of the serpent. Yeah.
Yes, and you read 3:15. It's amazing because it really prophesies that Jesus will be born of a woman, the seed of a woman, and that he will suffer, but that he will ultimately triumph. And Jesus even affirms that, and he affirms that in the Abrahamic covenant, 12:3, 12:15, the various ones, he affirms that the gospel was actually given to us in the Old Testament. It was foreshadowed. It was announced through Abraham, the father of Israel. I'm going to bless everyone through you, meaning not just the Jews, but the Gentiles. That was the announcement, one of the announcements of the gospel, just like 3:15 was about the serpent and all that. He's going to bless people. And ultimately, but we had to go through all the Old Testament times and all that pointing and the suffering. And by the way, Israel in a way is a type of Christ, because it shows all the suffering, the struggling that they did, and the ultimate redemption, and God never gave up on them. And so there's so much information that I'm almost flustered because I want to cover too much of it too fast.
Well, the book is a great read. Again, it's called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. You might also find a copy called The Emmaus Code. It's the same book. The original title was The Emmaus Code. Now it's called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament, which is really the subtitle of The Emmaus Code. So they just made it the main title. And it is a New York Times bestseller, ladies and gentlemen. That's the only time the words New York Times are good, when it says New York Times bestseller. And David is a New York Times best-selling author several times over. So any book you'll find with Limbaugh on it, including I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, I might add, is pretty good. So, hey, David, we're running out of time. Where can people, if they want to follow you, where do they go?
I'm on X under my name, @David Limbaugh. But I want to say one other thing.
Go.
Christ, then you said this, but let's not make light of it. Christ himself said in Luke 24:27, it all points to me. So it's not like we're making this up. It's do you really think he was talking about himself? Yeah, because he said he was.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the great David Limbaugh. David, it's always great having you on, and it's great reminiscing about Rush, man. Yeah. What a great contribution to the kingdom and to the country was Rush Limbaugh. Hey, friends, want to let you know, next week I'll be in Grand Rapids, Michigan, right near there at Grace Community Church in Hudsonville, Michigan, on Saturday and Sunday, the 17th and 18th of May. Hope to see you there, and happy Mother's Day tomorrow.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.